Today's episode is sponsored by Republic Boot Company. Republic Boot Company is a shop in Houston, Texas, and they're passionate about preserving Texas culture and creating fine, custom cowboy boots. All of their boots are made by hand in their shop in Houston, and their craftsmen have built boots for people like John Wayne and Steve McQueen. As opposed to the factory boots you can buy off the shelves at any store, Republic Boot Company can create any boot you can imagine, and you can count on the finest of craftsmanship and materials. You can look them up and order your own boots at republicbootcompany.com. I've got some exciting news here at Cowboy Crossroads headquarters. I've been working on a new record of cowboy folk songs, and I'm pleased to announce that it will be releasing on April 16th. It's titled Shadow of a Cowboy, and you can pre-order it now at andyhedges.com. I've got a few shows coming up that I'd like to tell you about. On March 31st, I'll be at the Camp Street Cafe in Crockett, Texas. On April 7th, I'll be at the 9th Annual Laura Riding Jackson Poetry and Barbecue in Vero Beach, Florida. And on April 12th, I'm performing at an exhibit on the art of Florida's cattle culture in Orlando, Florida. I'd love to see you and your friends at any of these shows, and you can find more info and links for tickets at my website. I'd like to start today's show with a poem by the great Bruce Giscadden. This one's entitled An Old Western Town. An old western town lay asleep in the sun of a long summer's day. It was then almost done. Shadows stretched out, and the horses stood round, sort of resting one leg with their heads hanging down. And two cowpunchers down at the Last Chance Saloon was trying to sing, and they was both out of tune. And at the end of the street that was dusty and narrow, scratching the dirt was some chickens and sparrows. And the dogs slept in the shade, and the people they strolled like they felt plumb contented in body and soul. And if you looked just a little ways off to the west, you could see the high mountains with snow on the crest and the shadows of clouds drifting over the flats. Oh, it sure made a right pretty picture at that, until this drunken cowpuncher was ready to go, and he figured he ought to put on a big show, so he spurred and he hollered and he shot his 6-gun, and he aimed to light out with his hoss on the run, but he didn't remember his cinches was slack until after he got that old pony untracked. Now this cow horse started to buck and to bawl, got rid of that cowpuncher, saddle and all. But before the drunk waddy was clean of the wreck, he was bit by 2 dogs, which he didn't expect. Now this cow horse bumped into a long hitching rack where a team that was hitched to a wagon reared back, and they lit out a dragging that old rattle trap and swinging the broke ends of 2 hitching straps. Well, a whole lot of people come from everywhere. The chickens and sparrows, they took for the air. The kids run for cover, and the women all screamed, while the dogs was all chasing that runaway team. And then some feller come out like some fool always did, a-waving and yelling and flapping his lid. But the team got too close, and the man lost his nerve, so he got out of the way, but he made the team swerve, and they broke off the porch post in front of the store. They busted the window and several things more. They was off of their feet when at last they got stopped, piled up in a heap with that wagon on top. They was fast in the harness. One horse nearly strangled, but the crowd went to work and they got 'em untangled, and right when they started to take 'em away, the storekeeper come out with something to say. His place had been wrecked, and what made it worse still is the man with the team owed the store man a bill. Now, he told him he'd take it right out of his hide, and he sure wasn't bluffing 'cause he got in and tried. But most all of the citizens present there reckon that storekeeper come off a mighty poor second. Then the town marshal came with his badge and his gun just in time for a drink when the whole thing was done. And the sun soon went down, and a few golden streaks on the afterglow showed on the far distant peaks, and the kerosene lamp shed a soft yellow light where the town folk were cooking their supper that night. 'Twas a real western night, with no fog and no haze, and stars hung in clusters so bright that they blazed. Some neighbors gathered for casual talk, and you could hear the slow footsteps along the boardwalk. There sprung up a soft, gentle breeze from the west, and one after another the lights went to rest, and the curtain of night settled quietly down on the best of all places, an old western town. Howdy folks, this is Andy Hedges, and you're listening to Cowboy Crossroads. On each episode, I interview a different guest and ask them to share stories and discuss music, poetry, and culture from the working cowboy West and beyond. My guest today is Dave Stamey. Dave is a singer and a songwriter from Orange Cove, California. Cowboys and Indians magazine has called him the Charlie Russell of Western music. I sat down with Dave in Elko, Nevada during the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering and recorded this interview. Here's Dave Stamey.
I was born in Billings, Montana, and 1958, which right now seems like the Stone Ages, doesn't it? I mean, wow. Anyway, and my family was, my dad was from North Carolina, but he always wanted to live in the West, and he always wanted a ranch, and so we ended up on a little ranch in near Shepherd, Montana, which is about 11 or 12 miles east of Billings. And we raised hay and calves and at one short, desperate time, pigs, and which, if you let that get out to anybody, I'll have to kill you. I'm sorry.
We can edit that part out.
No, you can leave that in. As far as signposts, I always tell everybody that probably the biggest musical influence I've ever had was the fact that my parents were members of the Columbia Record Club. So we would get a new album every month, and it would be anything from Frank Sinatra, Tom Lehrer, to Johnny Cash. So we had this very eclectic collection of music that I could listen to. And I always liked to sing, but I didn't know anybody actually wrote songs. I didn't know where they came from. I guess I thought they just dropped out of the sky. And when that finally occurred to me that people actually wrote their own songs, it was like a bolt from heaven. I absolutely was flabbergasted, but I still didn't pick up a pen and start writing songs until I was in my 30s, probably. Where I am right now, what I'm doing right now, is sort of like cowboying. It's something you end up doing because you've exhausted every other avenue that you had available to you. At this point in my life, I have no plan B. This is it. This is all I got. I did the bar thing coming out of high school, and playing in bars, because that was all there was. If you wanted to play music in 1976, 1977, when I was 12 years old, we had some downturns in the ranching world. We were very big into pigs at the time. My father decided that he was going to go into the hog business. That was going to keep the ranch alive, and because you only get one calf a year off a cow, but a sow will farrow out 2 times a year, and you'll get up to 12 little piglets. We were going to own the whole state of Montana before we were done, and I don't know what happened. It had something to do with Nixon and the Russians. I don't know what it was, but the price he froze the price of feed somehow. I'm not sure what even happened, but the price of pork crashed, and here we had 200 sows. So it absolutely devastated my old man. It broke him. And we sat around, and he was kind of wondering what to do. And then this rich man came, like a superhero, flying in out of the night, and offered all this money for the ranch. We were 12 miles out of Billings, and this guy had it in his head he was going to subdivide this ranch. So my dad says, well, sure. And he sold the place. My dad had married a California girl, and she'd had about all she needed in Montana with and 69 and 70 was a horrendous winter period in Montana. I remember 45 below for quite a while, and a lot during that winter. We were seeing in south central Montana, Billings and east of Billings, we were seeing the northern lights. It was that cold. It was that nasty. So she'd had all she wanted, and so we decided we were going to move back to California, where she was from. So we rolled into San Luis Obispo County, California, which is at that time, kind of a remote little place in California between Los Angeles and San Francisco, right in the middle, and there's nothing there. And we opened up a feedlot on a 20-acre place, on a 20-acre sand dune, basically. We're running 300 head of feeder steers. Now, 300 head of feeder steers on a 20-acre feedlot is like having the entire cast of Riverdance perform on your kitchen counter. It's a little tight. And I'll go ahead and finish this story, but we fed them moldy hay and a thing called Lumix, which is a molasses supplement that we would mix up with the moldy hay. And then we would get culls from the fields down in the Santa Maria Valley. We would bring carrot culls that you would bring up, or old broccoli culls, or things like this that the packers didn't want because they were deformed. It didn't look good. And we'd feed them to the cows for roughage. And we ended up with, like I say, 200 to 300 head of feeder steers. And then 1973 happened, which was the big downturn in the cattle market. And once again, my dad was caught, just flat-footed, and it broke him again. That was almost the end of his ranching career. And after that, he went into the horse business in a small way. And I ended up going to work at another feedlot that was near us, and that's where I started my professional cowboy career, was in that feedlot. But at the time that we moved down to California, and I felt very dislodged having left Montana, and it was, that was like a foreign country. My dad had years ago bought a silver tone guitar from Sears and Roebuck's, and he learned one chord on it and put it away. And I drug it out because it was something that I was interested in it. And it was a terrible guitar. It was just awful. One of those things where it was about an inch and a half off the neck at the 12th fret. If you weren't playing, you could use it to slice cheese. It was awful. If you wanted to learn, you had to want to learn really badly to follow through on that guitar. But I did. I sat on that bed and practiced and practiced and practiced until I kind of got the hang of it. But as far as the world of music in that part of the country, there was nothing. You had one country station and one rock and roll station. That was it. That's all there was. That was the entire world. There was no Ramblin' Jack Elliott or Woody Guthrie or John Prine or anybody else. They didn't exist. You never heard them. Never heard them. It was the country station or the rock station, and my old man wouldn't allow the rock station to be played in the house. So that's what I learned. And later on, if you wanted to play, which I did, the only place you had to play was in the bars. And so I played in the bars for 4 or 5 years till I was I was probably 22. And I got a belly full of it, and I said, you know what, if this is what it is, I don't want to do this anymore. And I quit. And I walked away from it, and I spent 10 years trying to write the great American novel. I didn't pick up a guitar seriously for 10 years.
How seriously did you pursue the novel?
I went at it like somebody killing snakes. That was what I wanted. That's what I wanted to do. I got as far as I ended up with a really high-powered agent in New York who couldn't sell anything I had. I had written in those 10 years. I had written 9 novels, all of which I would fight to the death right now to keep out of print. They were that bad. And the only thing he ever did was he got me a writing for hire job for Berkeley Press, doing an adult Western. I did a couple of those. Jake Logan's. That was it. And then he got sick and he ended up dropping me. And at that point, I had it was very disillusioning for me, and it's sort of a crushing blow. And I went back to work for an outfitter up in the mountains to kind of hide out. That was it. I wanted to kind of get over that, and I went to packing mules. Did that for a while, and started playing music while I was doing that for the guests up in the mountains around the campfire. And that's what started it, and they haven't let me quit since.
In a poem called The Dude Wrangler that was first published in 1935, Arizona cowboy Gale I. Gardner wrote these lines. So I drawed my gun and throwed it on him. I had to turn my face away. I shot him squarely through the middle, and where he fell, I left him lay. I surely hated for to do it, for things that's done you can't recall. But when a cowboy turns dude wrangler, he ain't no good no more at all. In a more recent piece, called The Dude String Trail, Dave Stamey wrote these lines. Someday I'm gonna sell out and get me a place in town, where the mules don't bray and the horses don't neigh, and there ain't no dudes around.
I fell into that the same way I fell into everything. And having had to deal with tourists, as they were called, when I was working for various outfitters, I had the experience to deal with them. And I found that I was pretty good at it. And I could be personable enough and interact with those people, where a lot of them old crusty guys, they didn't want to have anything to do with the dudes. And I get it, I understand that, but I enjoyed them and I enjoyed being around them. I later on, after having been in the business for several years, I got a little jaded with them, as I think any dude wrangler does who's been at it in sort of a long-term situation. But now having some distance on it and some perspective on it, I feel much a lot more warmth for them than I did at one time in my life. And I still am in the dude business in a small way. Like once a year, I host a ride into the ghost town of Bodie, California. And I work with an outfitter that I worked with 25 years ago and to putting that together. And we'll take 30 or 35 people out there, and most of them they're pretty good riders, I would say, most of them, but they're dudes. Most of them are dudes. And what I think a lot of people who have had this experience with the dude business, I don't know if they miss it or they just become so jaded that they choose not to see it, but they come to, because this is not part of their world. It never has been, but they want to experience it and have some sort of something they can take home with them, an experience that they can take home with them. And I find now that if we welcome them into our world, as we do here in Elko, if we welcome them into our world and treat them with respect, then by God, they'll come back next year and the year after that. And we should be really thankful that they do, because without them, there is no us. So I'm a much more reasonable person when it comes to dudes these days than I once was, and than a lot of people are, I think.
Yeah, it's a good thought. I was talking to Bess Quinlan earlier today, and we were I was interviewing him, but he was
who is just a brilliant writer.
Yeah, I mean, he
absolutely
was
love
contemplating this idea of, why does this stuff resonate with people so deeply? Because it does. I mean, just this whole phenomenon of Elko and the urban people that come, which is really the majority probably of the crowd.
Yeah.
And but it's a deep emotional thing for them. I mean, some of the people that come here, this may be the highlight of their year.
It is. It absolutely is, because, and I guess it's because. What do you think? The more complicated life gets, when you get back to something that's so simple, perhaps it has that's the appeal, because it's simple. It's living closer to the earth, living closer to the rural aspects. It's not you don't have all this. I mean, everything celebrates the urban these days. Everything on television, everything on the radio, which I don't listen to anymore. All the movies and all the shows, everything celebrates the urban and the hip hop and the this and the that, and the guys who live out, in the rural areas as we do, we don't get a representation. We don't, and that aspect. The rural West, to me, is one of the most underrepresented pieces of America that there is. And so that's what I've sort of made my life's work to do, is to celebrate them, because they need it. They need it. And I think the people who live in town, when they can see that these people actually exist, and they're not tobacco-chewing, toothless rubes, they're actually human beings. Who live close to the land, live a little bit more simply, perhaps, than they would if they had to live in the city. I think it has a certain appeal to them. I think it has a certain appeal. You'd have to ask them, I guess, to really find out what brings them here. But I think it might be that.
In 1770, in a poem called "The Deserted Village," Oliver Goldsmith wrote these lines: "Even now the devastation is begun, and half the business of destruction done. Even now, methinks, as pondering here I stand, I see the rural virtues leave the land." That piece of poetry was written over 200 years ago and is even more relevant today. And yet, people still remain in the rural West. It is in those people Dave Stamey has found his audience.
Somebody's telling their story, somebody's singing about their life, and they respond to that so well and so wonderfully, and they come out, and I have to honor that. I have to continue. As long as they're going to come out, I'm going to go to them. I'm going to go there and sing their songs to them. And it means so much to me when I get people off these ranches that will come for miles, for hours, and drive for hours to come and see a show. It just floors me, absolutely floors me, because apparently it means that much to them, that there's somebody telling their stories, singing their songs, singing about their lives. I had no idea that was out there, that was what was going to happen. But by golly, it has. And it's just absolutely, it's wonderful. It is absolutely wonderful. So if you got a zip code, I'm going to be there sooner or later. And I feel very, very lucky and very fortunate that I have been able to discover this and establish myself an audience. I'm just very happy, because I've built a lot of fence and shot a lot of horses, and this is better.
Dave Stamey is considered a songwriter, and Western Horseman magazine has declared his Vaquero song to be one of the greatest Western songs of all time. I asked Dave to talk about his songwriting craft and the writers who have influenced him.
I can pare it down as far as my songwriting heroes. I mean, people like the late Guy Clark was one. Leonard Cohen is another. Of course, Tyson, very, very important. Russell, who I consider a friend, and John Steinbeck. And to a certain point, even William Faulkner, any of these serious writers, those are the... I learned early on that what was important when it come to writing was to show up. That was the most important thing. And you had to show up, damn it, you had to show up every day, every single day. And when I was trying to write novels, I was working jobs at the same time, conventional jobs in town. And I would wake myself up at 4 a.m. and stumble in and write for 2 hours every single day before I went to work. And that was a religious regimen. I did that every single day for over 10 years. And early on as a kid, I mean, I was interested in writing prose at the same time that I was interested in playing guitar. I didn't put the two damn things together until I was 32 years old, which makes me want to go pound my head against the wall right now. It's like, idiot, idiot, idiot. Why didn't you see this? But I didn't. I wanted to write novels. And I met a guy named John Reese, who was an old pulp writer at the time, and I was about 14 years old and he was almost 70. Somebody put us together because they knew I wanted to be a writer, and they said, we want you to meet this guy. And he lived not too far away from us. And he sat me down, looked at what I had. I had some stories, and he read them. He told me a lot of things, but the biggest thing that he ever told me was, if you want to be a writer, you have to show up every day and do it every day, just the same as you brush your teeth. And so I wrote my butt off for 10 years. And I have to assume that what I learned during that period transposed into the songwriting, and which is why I get so many comments from people saying that my songwriting seems to be so descriptive. And I suppose it is. It comes from my prose background. That's it. But I take the craft of writing more seriously than I do performing. And I take performing very seriously. But the writing is something that it's really important to me, and it's really deeply important. And the craft of doing it well is so huge in my psyche that, I don't know what I put out. I put out 11 albums, but I've probably written enough songs to put out 30, but they didn't pass muster. They just didn't pass muster. It has to be what I think of as good enough. And it has not just good enough as far as being crafted, but it has to have some sort of resonance. It has to have some sort of depth of being in order to put it out there. I really don't want to put out a very shallow song. I really don't. I just doesn't. You can write 40 songs and have 30 of them be fluff, I guess is what I'm saying. I don't like to do fluff. And so I approach it as very serious business. Very serious business. I ride on the road a whole bunch. I learned how to write I actually learned how to ride horseback for a while there. I was when I was doing the dude thing. I wrote a lot of songs horseback just in my head. But what I generally get is if I'm riding at home or excuse me, riding in the car or riding on a horseback, I'll get the basic idea. I'll get a few lines. I'll get a musical phrase. And then I have to actually take that and sit in a small room somewhere and just hammer it out and hammer it out and hammer it out until, and I'll write 15 to 30 verses before I get, the 3 or 4 that I'm going to use. It's not a fun process for me. It's a lot of hard work, but it seems to be, it seems to work out okay. I mean, what I ended up doing, but I'm more of a word guy. I ended up with the words first and then try to put some sort of melody to it. But the best ones come, as you know, when you get the words and the melody at the same time. And the problem is there's only about 10% of them that come that way. The rest of them you got to work for real hard.
If you've listened to this show before, you know I love to ask musicians to tell stories about their worst gigs. Here's Dave's.
Oh, I think one of the worst ones was I was playing for, it was a corporate kind of a thing, but it was for the wives, and this is pretty early on, and I had wives and kids of. It was a retreat at a guest ranch, and they hired me to come in and perform. But I was performing not for the guys who actually were with the company, but their wives and children, and. It was me and an old cowboy poet named Jake Copas, and we were going to do a little show for him. And this would have been early '90s, probably, when the cowboy poetry thing was really rolling hard, and Baxter was still showing up on Johnny Carson and all that whole thing. So it was a kind of an exciting thing. Well, so we get ready to do our little show, and we come out to this sort of picnic area at the guest ranch where all the wives and mothers and their kids were. And we start to do our little show, and I bring out the guitar and I go to start playing. Well, the mothers say, "Oh, here we go, let's try," and then they pass out to all of the kids harmonicas and kazoos, and that was the end of that. You cannot do a structured show of any kind when you have 24 9-year-old kids with kazoos and harmonicas. It was over at that point.
That's sounds like when you could no way to get through that.
No,
Did you
yeah,
actually
that
go
was
through the gig, or
yeah.
was it?
I ended up doing what I ended up doing, and the kids played their harmonicas and they played their kazoos, and then I got the hell out of there and took my check, went home.
Wow.
What can you do?
Yeah.
It's trying to be as professional as you can. Well, this is a new song, and it's one I've enjoyed playing. I have to go down to Southern California quite a bit during the year, at least 4 or 5 times a year to perform or take care of business. And there's always, especially when you're working near Hollywood, you always meet that one guy, or you can meet that one guy who was he was almost in every Western movie that was ever made. Almost, he was almost in every one of them, and he knew almost everybody, and all he needed was one break, and he never quite got it. So that was what this is about. Andy Devine was a buddy of mine, knowed him since I was a kid. Said he would get me work as an extra, but you know, he never did. He'd buy the drinks on Saturday night at the Big Bear Bar and Grill. Long about midnight he'd wander off, looking for old Wild Bill. Never forget old Smiley Burnett, met him in Mexico. He could play the zither like nobody's business. You'd hear him on the radio. We'd drink coffee at the laundromat while the dryers tumbled around. And he'd call Gene for a limousine to take us on into town. John Wayne lost my number, east west he never called. And Roy Rogers forgot my name, I think I hated that most of all. Slim Pickens dated my sister, we never did get along. He pestered me like the devil himself, said he wanted me to write him a song. He ran off with a female jockey who lived on the canyon's rim. He never cashed my check, I never heard from him again. Leo Carrillo offered me part in his picture show, said he was making a comeback. I told him I didn't know. They gave the part to Gabby Hayes, but the picture never did get made. Me and old Leo went down to the park, we're sitting here in the shade. John Wayne lost my number, east west he never called. And Roy Rogers forgot my name, I think I hated that most of all. Andy Devine was a buddy of mine, I knowed him since I was a kid. Said he couldn't get me work as an extra, but you know, he never did. He'd buy the drinks on Saturday night at the Big Bear Bar and Grill. Long about midnight he'd wander off, looking for old Wild Bill. Looking for old Wild Bill. Looking for old Wild Bill.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking the time to do this, man.
I enjoyed it. Thanks for the good questions.
All right, folks, that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Dave Stamey for taking the time to visit with me. You can find out more about Dave at davestamey.com. I'd like to thank Republic Boot Company for sponsoring today's episode. You can find out more about Republic Boots at republicbootcompany.com. You can find out more about me and this show at andyhedges.com. If you're enjoying the show and would like to help me keep it going, you can go pre-order my new album, Shadow of a Cowboy, on the website. Or you could make a donation to the show. Or you could write a review and leave me a 5-star rating on the iTunes store. If if you'd like to contact me with a question or a comment or a story, I'd love to hear from you. Send an email to andy@andyhedges.com. Thank you for listening to Cowboy Crossroads.